if I go first?
In 1998, cinema as the world knew it was dominated by groundbreaking films like Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan, a film that redefined the war movie genre with its brutal depiction of combat. It was a masterpiece of historical realism. And while this film was having its day in the sun, yet another war film was quietly being assembled. This film was different from other war films, and it wasn't just about the mechanics of war, it was about losing humanity in the heart of nature. The film was Thin Red Line, and it was no doubt epic on screen. But here are 20 weird facts you didn't know about the film. Number 20. There was a 20-year wait for this masterpiece. You can't talk about Thin Red Line without the man who directed it, and of course, it was directed by a ghost. At the time, Terrence Malick was the J.D. Salinger of American cinema. He was quite prominent in New Hollywood, and he produced two notable films, Badlands and Days of Heaven. However, in 1978, he vanished and took a hiatus from filmmaking. During his 20-year hiatus, he lived in Paris and became reclusive, but he was still secretly writing and working on projects. Terrence Malick's 20-year absence from Hollywood wasn't ended one fine day through a simple phone call. It took a whole decade of patience and persistence from two producers, Bobby Geisler and John Roberdeau. Their pursuit began in 1978, when Geisler first reached out to Malick to direct a film adaptation of a play, an offer the director declined. For 10 years, there was absolutely no way to get through to Malick. Then, in 1988, Geisler and Roberdeau tracked Malick down in Paris. This time, they had an offer for him to adapt the novel, The White Hotel. He turned them down again, but this time he left a loophole. He told the producers that he was willing to write and direct an adaptation of two works, either Molière's 17th-century comedy Tartuffe or James Jones's brutal 1962 World War II novel, The Thin Red Line. The producers knew this was their only chance, so they immediately chose the war novel, and the rest is history. Number 19. The first draft was a 300-page philosophical Bible. After the producers chose the war novel, they paid Malick $250,000, and on January 1, 1989, the ghost of Hollywood finally began to write. This is where things get interesting. 5 years after he started writing, Malick delivered his first draft. You might be wondering what's weird about that. Well, it was not your conventional screenplay. Usually, standard scripts go between 90 and 120 pages. Instead, Malick's first draft was a monumental 300 pages long. This document was the first apparent sign that the film wouldn't be just like any other war movie ever made. This wasn't just a regular draft. In fact, it was less of a blueprint for the plot and more of a philosophical essay on war, nature, and the human soul. The sheer length of it was a clear indication of the need to place a focus on the inner lives of soldiers and to also place a poetic description on those lives, instead of just going all in on a narrative action alone. It was clear as day that Malick had his sights on not just adapting the events of James Jones's novel, but he was adapting the spirit of the novel and then telling the story through an angle based on his unique perspective. This 300-page Bible then became the source code that the entire chaotic production could follow. Number 18. The director had a weird pre-production shopping list. There's nothing more surprising than the things Hollywood producers have to do to keep their talents happy. To keep Malick engaged and earn his trust, producers Geisler and Roberdeau had to become more than just financiers. They also had to become his personal research assistants, and they were at his beck and call to carry out tasks such as hunting down obscure and rare materials. They also catered to his every whim, and they reportedly spent $2 million of their own money over the years just to keep the project alive. Malick had the weirdest requests, but his requests showed just how important his creative process was. It was uniquely holistic and sensory. He was not just thinking about characters and scenes, he was also creating a whole world of sound, image, and ideas before a single frame was ever shot. He requested a book titled Reptiles and Amphibians of Australia. While this might sound like a weird request, it actually directly foreshadows the film's final imagery, where nature's creatures crawl over the wreckage of human conflict. He also asked for audio tapes of the Kodo drummers of Japan. He did this because he wanted to understand the enemy's culture. He wanted to know about the Navajo code talkers, as it was an important detail he was interested in, especially in terms of hidden languages and all their connections to war. Number 17. The film was almost falling apart. Weeks before shooting, after almost a decade of development, the producers were beginning to run out of funds because they were already exhausted by 1995. They then brought in veteran producer Mike Medavoy, whose company Phoenix Pictures finally secured the necessary financial backing from Sony Pictures. The pieces were finally all in place, and the cast was also being put together while locations were being scouted and the entire behind-the-scenes workings of a major motion picture were well underway. However, and quite unfortunately, disaster struck in April 1997, just months before the principal photography was scheduled to begin. Sony's new chairman, John Calley, got cold feet. He had lost all hope and faith in the project, and then he pulled the plug, leaving the $52 million film without a studio. This was by no means an ideal situation, and there were no quick fixes in sight. After many years of toiling and working, the whole project was on the verge of falling apart. In a desperate and last-minute plot to save it all, Medavoy and Malick flew to Los Angeles and pitched the film to 20th Century Fox. Fox then decided to step in, and they co-financed the film with a Japanese company called Pioneer Films and Medavoy's own Phoenix Pictures. The film was certainly on the edge of falling apart and into oblivion. Luckily for them, it was saved at the very last minute. Number 6. A long list of big Hollywood stars wanted a role in the film. It's not every day you hear about the biggest stars of Hollywood clamoring their way for a chance to appear in a film. With this film, the news that Terrence Malick was finally making another movie echoed through Hollywood. He was a legendary director, and his two-decade absence made the opportunity to work with him all the more special and unique, like a once-in-a-lifetime kind of opportunity. As a result, casting calls became inundated with everyone and anyone. Quite a number of A-list actors scrambled for even the smallest roles, and many of them were even willing to take pay cuts so that they could be on a Malick set. The list of actors that made their way to the top of the list includes some of the biggest names in the industry like Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Al Pacino, and Johnny Depp. They were all considered for roles at one point or another, and they were really interested in those roles too. These actors went to great lengths so that they could get a part. Leonardo DiCaprio, for instance, was just fresh off filming Romeo and Juliet in Mexico. Still, he flew to Austin to meet with Malick at the airport. Matthew McConaughey skipped a day of filming his own starring role in A Time to Kill so that he could have a chance to see the director. Then there's Bruce Willis, one of the biggest stars in the world. He offered to pay for first-class tickets for the casting crew if they would just give him a couple of lines. Number 15. The star of the film became a ghost. Weirdest facts to come from the Thin Red Line, none is weirder than the story of Adrien Brody. At just 23 years old, Brody had landed the role of a lifetime as Corporal Jeffrey Fife, the central character and protagonist of the James Jones novel. This was meant to be his big break and the role that would make him a star. He literally poured everything he had into this role, and as the release of the film drew near, his team began to prepare an Oscar campaign. By the time the premiere day arrived, Brody sat in the theater watching the film for the very first time like everyone else. He realized that his character, the same one who was supposed to be the narrative anchor of the story, was barely in the film. Malick extensively reworked the movie in post-production to focus on a different storyline. He was trying to find the soul of the film in the editing room, and he ended up shifting the focus to Jim Caviezel's private wit. Brody's lead role was, in his own words, eviscerated. He only appeared for about 5 minutes in the final 3-hour film with just a handful of lines. He later described the experience as harrowing and a moment of public embarrassment and potential career disaster. He had gone to the premiere thinking he was the star of the film, and then he walked out feeling like a ghost. Number 14. The A-list stars who vanished completely. Brody might have been the most prominent casualty of Malick's ruthless editing process, but he wasn't the only one. There were many well-known actors who filmed scenes, some of which were actually substantial, only to find out that they had been completely removed from the final film, and their contributions basically only made it to the cutting room floor. Bill Pullman, who had just played the President of the United States in Independence Day just 2 years earlier, was cast as Sergeant McTay and filmed his scenes. However, he was nowhere to be found in the theatrical cut. He wasn't the only one. The versatile character actor Locus Haas also saw his performance disappear into thin air. The one that will probably shock you the most is Mickey Rourke's disappearance. Turns out he was cast as a scout sniper, and by all accounts he gave quite a deeply committed performance. Yet that didn't spare him from being completely removed. Now, if anyone ever wants to see his powerful work in this project, they would have to find the deleted scene in the Criterion Collection release of the film. The sheer number of talents that were filmed and discarded is shocking. It is living proof of just how brutal the director was. In his defense, he didn't care about how big a star was. If he needed to sacrifice any for the sake of the final composition, he would. Number 13. Mickey Rourke claimed his disappearance was political. While most of the actors who were removed or had scenes deleted silently accepted it as part of the mysterious and painful Malick process, Mickey Rourke did not keep quiet about it. Years later, he publicly suggested that his removal from the film wasn't based purely on an artistic decision. In 2005, Rourke stated in an interview that there were political reasons why he was removed from the movie. He stated that it really upset him, primarily due to the temperature of his scenes and the industry, and that his scenes were cut. At that time, Rourke already had quite a bad reputation in Hollywood, and his claim implied that the studio, 20th Century Fox, had pressured Malick to remove him due to his controversial status. However, this narrative is less likely due to the final cut privileges and artistic creativity that Malick usually has. If you're trying to figure out a more plausible reason why Rourke was removed, you might get a hint from the deleted scene itself. While Rourke delivered a quite impressive performance that showcased intensity and commitment, there was a certain energy that could be felt in his scenes that didn't quite align with the director's vision. His performance had a raw, confrontational energy that felt distinct from the film's overall ethereal rhythm. It seems more likely that his scenes were cut out because of the rhythm and not because of any political reason. Number 12. Billy Thornton lost 3-hour voiceover. One part of the film that stands out is the use of voiceover to convey the soldier's innermost thoughts, questions, and memories. The voiceover in this film sometimes belongs to no single character, but to an omniscient questioning presence, which is a central part of the film. At first, Malick envisioned the film with a more traditional narrative structure, guided by a single narrator. Due to this thought process, he hired Billy Thornton, who recorded hours upon hours of narration for the film. This entire performance, along with a massive creative choice, was ultimately thrown out. The decision to then scrap a single guiding voice in favor of a polyphonic stream of consciousness was perhaps one of the most pivotal creative choices in the entire post-production process. It was essentially what transformed the film because a single narrator would have created a degree of separation, telling a story about the soldiers. By choosing to replace him with an array of unfiltered thoughts, Malick was able to tell the story the way he envisioned. He wanted the audience to fully understand the film, so he aimed to force viewers to experience the war not as a coherent historical event, but also as a shared, subjective, and deeply confusing spiritual crisis. This was the very moment that the film found its radical voice, and it was so much better for it. Number 11. The Tyranny of the Magic Hour. On set, Terrence Malick was a slave to the sun. He famously favored shooting during the magic hour, the moment of a beautiful, soft, and warm light that occurs just after sunrise and just before sunset. For most directors, this is a cherished but limited tool. For Malick, it was a governing principle, and on the set of The Thin Red Line, this preference became a logistical nightmare that dictated the rhythm of every single day. One crew member even noted that Malick couldn't tell the studio that he intended to shoot for only a few minutes each day, as they would have probably freaked out. So instead, he would hold off on shooting scenes for hours, making the cast and crew wait until the light was absolutely perfect in his eyes. This frustrated everyone, from actors who were ready to perform to the cinematographer. John Toll, who had to be prepared to shoot complex sets at a moment's notice based on the sun's position. While this was Malick's preference, it was most definitely a weird choice and also an inefficient and expensive choice. However, it was still proof of just how much Malick was never willing to compromise on his artistic vision. For him, the quality of the light wasn't just another technical detail, it was an important, essential, and spiritual part of the image. Number 10. Conducting an on-set symphony. Another weird fact most people don't know about is that Malick treated the film's score not as a post-production process, but as an active part of the filming process. He actually had composer Hans Zimmer write hours of music before a single frame was shot, based entirely on conversations, the script, and Malick's philosophical ideas. This wasn't the usual process of creating a film score during production, but he had a method, and he stuck with it. Then during takes, Malick would play this pre-recorded music on set. He did this for many reasons. For starters, he wanted the music to help create a specific mood he was trying to capture. He wanted the music to cover the actors and crew in the film's emotional atmosphere. The music also provided a rhythm for the camera movements and the actors' performances, allowing them to be physically present in the acoustic world of the film as they created the visual world. This technique might have been unconventional, but playing music during filming helped Malick, the actors, and the crew get into the right mindset. It literally transformed the set from a technical space into an immersive and sensory environment. Number 9. Terrence Malick saw war as green poison. Terrence Malick created the thin red line around one powerful idea: war as a green poison. He wanted the Battle of Guadalcanal to feel more like just soldiers fighting, since it was about paradise being destroyed. Malick imagined the island as some type of Eden, a place full of life, beauty, and peace, only to be corrupted and tainted by human violence. This vision ultimately shaped the entire production of the film. Unlike many war movies that place their focus on blood and all the violence, Malick was not interested in showing endless close-ups of wounds. Instead, he just wanted the viewers to notice what violence actually does to the world. For him, this film was a chance to show that the environment was just as important as a character, like the soldiers were. That's why the camera didn't stay too long focused on human suffering. When someone was shot, we could see a tree explode into many splinters, or the ground being torn apart by the bullets, or even a bird with a broken wing falling from the sky. For Malick, showcasing these moments also gave the audience a chance to be reminded that nature is a casualty of war as well. Through this mindset, Malick was able to consistently portray a contrast between human destruction and the quiet endurance of the natural world. Number 8. The score was written before the film was shot. The standard way or process for scoring a film is quite straightforward. The composer comes in during post-production and then watches a rough cut of the movie and proceeds to write music to fit the finished images. However, in this case, for the Thin Red Line, Terrence Malick completely turned the process on its head. He brought in Hans Zimmer onto the project long before filming even began, and the composer and his collaborator John Powell had to write hours of music based on nothing more than Malick's abstract ideas and the ginormous 300-page script. Zimmer didn't start working on the project right before it began. In fact, he started working on it for about 2 years. He composed multiple themes and atmospheric pieces that were then given to Malick as a library of musical options. The director and his editors then treated this music like found footage. They would select pieces and cut them into the film wherever they felt it fit best. This is exactly why the score feels as though it is deeply embedded in the DNA of the film itself. The fact is, the score wasn't written to just accompany images. Instead, the images were shot and then edited to harmonize with music that already existed. It's a genius move if you really think about it, and it is also quite a unique way to go about it, and this makes sense for a Malick film. Number 7. The film created Hollywood's forbidden cue. Out of the many hours of music that Zimmer composed, one track would have a whole life of its own, and it essentially changed the sonic landscape of Hollywood as a whole. That piece was called Journey to the Line, and it was built on a sneakily simple, trance-like, repetitive 4-chord progression that slowly builds in a certain orchestral-like intensity. The track became a masterclass in emotional ambiguity, and with good reason. Zimmer himself has described it as objective. He stated that it can feel tragic and hopeful, or mournful and uplifting, all at the same time. It possesses a certain versatility that makes it the perfect placeholder music for editors during early cuts of a film. In fact, it became so popular in editing bays and movie trailers for films like 12 Years a Slave that it became known throughout the industry as the forbidden cue. Composers inevitably grew tired of it because they were now constantly being asked by directors and studios to rip it off, to create something that sounded just like Journey to the Line. This is why this fact is weird. because in quite a weird twist, a piece of music that was created from one of the most personal and anti-commercial films of that time, ironically became one of the most commercialized and imitated musical templates in modern cinema. Number 6. The Oscar-winning cinematographer operated his own camera. The cinematographer of The Thin Red Line was John Toll, who was basically a master of his craft, who had just achieved the rare success of winning back-to-back Academy Awards for Legends of the Fall and Braveheart. So, with that level of success and with a film of this scale in line, a cinematographer of his caliber would direct a team of camera operators. However, one would be so wrong, because Toll did the exact opposite. He loved Malick's desire for spontaneity and intimacy, so he chose to operate the camera himself for much of the shoot. In order to get a certain documentary-like feeling the director wanted, Toll decided to go for small, lightweight 35mm 8-in cameras, which were about half the weight of the industry-standard ARRI cameras. This allowed him to be more mobile and reactive, ensuring he captured moments as they unfolded. Toll had started his career as an operator, so he felt it was the most natural way to film a story where things happened spontaneously, almost like an event with limited control. This wasn't what you would expect of an award-winning cinematographer. Toll was dedicated to getting the job done, even if it meant doing most of the heavy lifting with his camera. The result was perfectly in tune with his dedication, as it is some of the most beautiful cinematography in film history. The fact that the film was captured by a 2-time Oscar winner was already an interesting fact on its own, but the fact that this 2-time Oscar winner wasn't afraid to capture the film in his own way, even if it meant wading through mud and grass, makes it even better. Number 5. The Guadalcanal you see is mostly fake. The film is set entirely on Guadalcanal, one of the Solomon Islands, and the site of the most brutal 6-month campaign during World War II. While the production did their jobs effectively and scouted the actual historic battlefields and shot footage there for 24 days, it might shock you to realize that a vast majority of what you see on screen is not actually the Solomon Islands at all. Now you might be wondering why, especially if they went through all that trouble to scout the actual historic location. Due to logistical challenges and serious health concerns related to malaria, filming on the actual Guadalcanal was limited to daylight hours only. So the production needed to find a safer and more accessible stand-in for the actual location. They found a replacement in the Daintree rainforest in Queensland, Australia. The crew spent 100 days shooting in Australia, which provided the beautiful Eden-like and mostly terrifying jungle landscape that was visually featured in the film. To top it all off, some scenes were also filmed in the United States off Catalina Island and at a military base in California. With this in mind, it is safe to say that The Thin Red Line is a work of cinematic geography because a mix of locations was put together to create Malick's vision of a lost paradise. Number 4. A hitchhiking backpacker became a soldier in the film. It is not surprising to think that shooting a film in some of the most remote locations would come with its fair share of weirdness. However, this one takes the cake. The decision to film in the remote and tropical resort town of Port Douglas, Australia, actually led to some of the most unconventional casting opportunities for locals in the area, as well as for travelers. One of the weirdest yet charming stories comes from a 20-year-old American backpacker who was exploring the Australian outback with a little more than a tent and a couple of $100. After he heard about a casting call for a big Hollywood movie, he decided to go for it, and he eventually got a part as an extra. He played one of the American soldiers. Through his personal perspective of how it all happened, you can tell that it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. According to him, he was hitchhiking through the wilds of Cape Tribulation and Cooktown before being called to report for duty. He actually described hitching a ride at 5 in the morning to get to the secluded private ranch where filming was taking place, and this was his routine for the entire duration of his time on the set of the film. This story might be a weird one, but it is also the perfect anecdote that gives a human touch to this massive and star-studded production. Number 3. It is the second movie of the book. This is another unusual fact associated with the film that a shocking number of people remain unaware of to this very day. Terrence Malick's version of The Thin Red Line is so iconic and major that not a lot of viewers know that there is actually a second film adaptation of James Jones's novel. The first film was also called The Thin Red Line. but it was a black and white film released in 1964, directed by Andrew Martin and starring Keir Dullea and Jack Warden. On one hand, you have Malick's version, which is more of a metaphysical meditation, and then you have the 1964 version, which is so much grittier and more like a war movie. In fact, the earlier film is arguably by far more faithful to the themes of Jones's novel. The book focuses on the existential dread and the insanity of war, with a protagonist who discovers a dark part of himself through the act of taking a life. In a way, Malick took the raw material of the book and then transformed it. He turned the novel's central character, Private Witt, from a stubborn, half-educated troublemaker into a sweet, self-questioning philosophical figure. He amplified a brutal story about the chaotic nature of combat. Then he turned it into an epic poem about the conflict between humanity and nature, good and evil, and sanity and madness. Number 2. It scored surprisingly high for historical accuracy. While the other facts and its reputation make the film seem as though it relied on being philosophical art, that isn't entirely what it did. Sure, many people would describe it as an intellectual art film, and because of this description, many people assume The Thin Red Line doesn't take the historical facts seriously. Some critics even argue that the film makes no attempt at historical accuracy, and others point out that it glosses over the hellish environmental conditions of the real Guadalcanal campaign, portraying it more as a paradise than the disease-infested jungle it was. While critics might have hit the nail on the head a little bit in that regard, from a purely military tactics perspective, the film was actually surprisingly precise. Military historian John McManus actually analyzed the film and gave it a strong 9 out of 10 for accuracy. He praised the film for correctly depicting the United States Army's role in the battle, which is often overlooked in favor of the Marines. He also noted the accurate portrayal of the sharp edges of kunai grass that defines the landscape, and also applauded an important assault sequence for its perfect depiction of fire and maneuver tactics, where one group provides covering fire while another advances. This fact alone reveals that Malick was clever, and it came through in the film. It proved that the film wasn't just created in a way that ignored reality. Instead, it was a profound philosophical inquiry carefully hidden within thorough research and an accurate historical framework. Number 1. It fought a philosophical war with Saving Private Ryan. The Thin Red Line was released in December 1998, just a few months after Saving Private Ryan. The two films were almost instantly pitted against each other. This was inevitable because they were both World War II films from legendary directors, and they even went on to compete for the same awards at the Oscars. While these two films seemed quite similar, the truth is they could not have been more different in their approach to war. On one hand, Saving Private Ryan was a film about the physical horror of combat and the moral imperative of a specific mission, while The Thin Red Line was more philosophical in nature. It was a poetic film about the spiritual and psychological experience of being a small part of a huge and incomprehensible conflict. While one film asked, "How do we save one good man?" the other film asked, "What is this war in the heart of nature?" At the 71st Academy Awards, Saving Private Ryan won the battle as it took home 5 Oscars, while The Thin Red Line won 0 awards despite getting 7 nominations. However, over the years, Malick's film has continued to evolve. While Saving Private Ryan defined what a war film could show, The Thin Red Line expanded the definition of what a war film could be. It's weird to think that The Thin Red Line went from a dream that was a whole decade long to a cinematic reality, and this was a war in a way. There was a battle against financial collapse, and then there were the limits of time and light in the set. Through it all, the result was a film that felt more like it was discovered and less constructed. And these weird facts are all the proof you need. Which of these facts surprised you most? Share with us in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.